Hello everyone, and welcome to week 4 of the workshop. And this week we're going to be talking about how we can take our base color maps that we've painted from week 3 and incorporate some of these finer details to the color that's really going to bring everything together and bring things to life. Before we do that, I just want to do a quick recap of the maps that we painted for last week. So as you can see, here's where we left it. I want you guys to have maps similar to this. Obviously, it doesn't have to be the same color, but in terms of tonality and basically what you guys have decided for your hero reference to kind of match towards that. So if your character is Caucasian, for example, may have more of the blue or greens around the eyes and then pinkier around the eyelids and lips and nose and ears and stuff like that. Whereas my character, because he's kind of fabricated from imagination, I kind of had artistic license to go where my artistic sensibilities went. So darker purples around the eyes. However, if we go real close, we're getting some of that pink tone right around the eyelids, inside the eyelids, and then the ears, and then that nice deep purple on the lips to finish it all off. And I'm very happy with this. However, we need to go a couple steps further. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring in my fine displacement maps that we painted from before. And so I'm just going to go and add a new layer, and I'm going to right click and import into the layer, and I'm going to find my fine disp. I believe it's this one here. Nope, that's the wrong one. Hold on. There we go. So these are the fine displacement maps that we painted in week 2. And I'm just going to do something very simple. I'm just going to do a overlay of the map. And very, very quickly, you're seeing some really interesting things going on here that the fine displacement gives us for free, and when done correctly. So if I were to turn this off, all that fine pore detail that we painted is actually now being represented into our color maps, which is what we want. If we take a look, I'm going to open up Photoshop real quick. If we take a look at some of our original reference, and let's just grab Norbert. You can see that some of this pore detail is really, there's some coloration in there, and we're actually getting a slight darkening in the pores, which is what we want. Sorry. There we go. And if you can see in some areas in the forehead, we're getting those darker areas in the pores that for the most part is coming from the divoting into the pores, and we want to represent that. So if I go back to my maps, this is exactly what this map is doing for us. We go back and forth, you can see that we're getting the darkening in the pores, but I don't want to go this far. This is a bit too intense for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to, before that, I'm going to just call this fine disp, and I'm just going to knock this down by 50%. And already it's reading much closer to this in terms of intensity. and I'm very happy with this. And I really didn't have to do anything here, because we spent a lot of time painting that fine displacement, making sure that it was dialed in nice and tight, and all this stuff. We're getting some incredible wrinkle variation that when we turn this off, you can see how this coloration is really playing well with the fine displacement that we painted. So we're getting some really nice color variation from the freckling and the tones that plays perfectly with the way we painted the fine displacement. And you can see how if you do it layer by layer, we have full control over how we want to blend all this stuff together. And ultimately this is going to give us more control in the end when we want to dial this in look dev. And already this skin, without really doing much, is coming together very, very nicely. So I'm very happy with this. But I want to make sure that it's not even all over the place. And I think that's a common mistake a lot of people make when painting textures, is that they do these blanket changes, for instance like an ambient occlusion or a fine displacement such as this, and they just blanket it over the entire thing and call it a day. But we need to be a bit more mindful and deliberate than that, because it's this extra step that's really going to define photoreal from real. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer mask and reveal. And before I do that, actually, I want to speed things up a bit. So I briefly talked about the caching system in Mari 2.0. And so you can see all these layers that are kind of the most offensive layers that are contributing to the disk cache usage. And right now it's a little bit sluggish for me. Not too bad, but just enough where I'm going to lose half a step when I'm painting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that fine disp out and take this base skin. I'm going to cache it. And what this is going to do is it's going to free up some of the cache, so it allows me to paint much faster and quickly. So things stay a little bit snappy, and I can keep the creative juices flowing without worrying about being bogged down by how many layers I have and how much cache it's using. So it takes a few seconds to do this. And you're going to see that this layer skin is going to turn green when it's done. And it's going to treat what I cached in this entire layer as one layer instead of the however many I had, I think 12 to 15 layers. So this is a nice feature to have when you start building up your layers. And then there we go. So now the skin is grayed out, so I can't do anything with it. It's locked and it's turned blue, and now you can see it's much quicker and more responsive. So when I'm painting into this mask here, it's going to be much faster, and I can just keep moving forward. And this is another reason why I wanted to keep the base skin tones as a separate set and painting that independent from the finer details, because then I can cache and uncache certain features, blanket features such as the broad coloration versus the fine detail in the color maps, and that keeps things compartmentalized and modular, so I can really move forward quickly and efficiently, and on the flip side, move backwards if I need to, if we send this to review and director or the visual effects supervisor wants something different. So right now what I want to do is, if we go back to this guy here, I did mention earlier when we were looking at the skin reference that there is displacement detail that isn't properly represented in some of these photographs. That'll show up as kind of speck detail or won't show up at all. And so if we were to bring in another face, let's see. Take a quick look at this. You're seeing a lot of specular detail on her face that is picking up some of the displacement detail, so you can see some of that going in. However, what this photo doesn't represent, and I think it's a good example right here, you can see that there's specular detail and displacement detail coming up on this part of the side of the temple. However, as it moves towards this area, and the way skin reacts to lighting, you don't see that detail there. So if we were to do this traditionally and project this skin and then convert it to displacement, there's going to be a discrepancy there, because we're going to get displacement and specular detail here, but we're not going to get it here, and it just isn't going to look right, and it's going to give that kind of projected photo look that I think happens a lot when we're doing the historically traditional method of painting skin. And it's basically just taking a photograph and projecting it on and using that color information for everything. And it gives this really weird photo projected look that I'm not a fan of, and never really been a fan of until this new technique has come around, because it allows us to step away from that. So if we go back to this character, this displacement detail is going to be independent. So when that is applied to the surface, actually let's do that right now. I'm going to go to a shader and plug in the fine displacement. Like so. Actually, sorry, let me go to fine displacement here and turn that off for a second. There we go. I'll crank that down. This is something I did earlier, so let me actually keep things less confusing. I'm just going to load in the displacement that we're looking at before. This is my working scene from before, so there's some other stuff that we will cover later in coming weeks. But for now, there we go. So I'm going to just quickly group all this stuff and then cache it, since we're not using it. So going back to my original point, there's displacement detail that in this lighting setup we can see evenly throughout the face, which is perfect because that's the way the skin truly exists in terms of surface quality. However, we want to make sure that we keep things complex, and in order to do that, we're going to have to fade some of this detail in and out. So basically in the color maps you can see that this displacement detail isn't really showing up in certain areas of the face, especially on glancing angles. So it's very deceiving when you're looking at these photographs. You know, we actually, in the old method, we actually like something like this because it gives us that displacement detail we need so we can create our displacement maps, because we didn't have these skin scans before. But now, since we do have these skin scans, we can make things a lot more complicated and complex in terms of general overall look in the end, by keeping things independent. So if I go back to Mari, let me take a look at this. So we're getting some really nice displacement detail in the face. So what I want to do is I want to go back to my color, and I want to make sure, I'm going to select my mask, and what I want to do is paint some of this displacement detail out of the color maps because it doesn't exist. And that's, I think, a common mistake people make, is they just expect that the displacement detail exists all over the face, but it really doesn't. And this comes from just looking at more photographic reference of faces and seeing how it all plays together with lighting. So for right now, I'm going to just grab a brush here. Just going to be soft brush, nothing crazy. Making sure I have black selected. I'm going to paint some of this displacement detail out ever so slightly. And I know it's a very subtle thing, but it really helps in the end when we're going to look at this guy. Because there will be angles with lighting. Let me just turn that speck down. So there's going to be angles where lighting hits the face and we're going to see just the color information. But then it also reads the displacement at other angles. So prime example is we're just seeing kind of color information here, but we're seeing specular displacement information here, just the way the light's situated. And it's kind of flopped on this where we get mostly just color information and lighting information. And it's the variation here that's going to sell the believability of the skin. So when it rolls across, you'll see displacement detail based off of the light highlights, but it's not going to correlate one-to-one to the color information on the glancing angles. And so that's going to achieve a really elegant look in the end by fading in and out some of these details that we don't necessarily want all over the place. Especially in the ear here. And because I'm painting into this mask, it's completely non-destructive. So any decisions I make that I regret, I can quickly take them out. Like so. And then we get away from that stamped photo look. And we're getting something more deliberate and unique. Again, it's subtle, but it goes a long way in the final look. Like so. There, I'm happy with that. And in order to hide this mask, if you just hold down Shift and click it, just like in Photoshop, you can hide the mask and see the changes you've made. So again, extremely subtle effect, but it starts giving a much more believable look in the end. I'm really happy with that. And already we're seeing night and day difference just by incorporating that displacement map into this color map here. It starts really feeling like skin. And this is why we've done this independently, is so we can have independent control at this stage of the process. But there's one more layer I want to add to really bring all of this back together. And that is the ZBrush displacement that I've given you guys in week 1, I believe. So I'm going to import into this layer and grab the ZBrush disp. Like so. There we go. And I'm going to rename this. And I'm going to soft light this in. but obviously very, very strong. In fact, way too much for me. So I'm going to just tone this back. And my aim for this is I just want to get the major folds. And again, just slight color variation, slight darkening in the major folds. You can see it here in the face where we don't get any specular or displacement information, but you're seeing that in these folds we're getting slight darkening of the skin. Again, if you just blanket this on the face like we've done here, it's just going to look kind of game-like, which I don't want. I just want to deliberately put it in certain areas. So I'm going to add another layer mask and do the exact same process with my fine displacement. I just want to paint some of this back. Just ever so slightly. I really like what's happening in the folds of the face and in these really deep folds here in the chin. And I'm actually pretty happy with this. So we go back, we can see what this map has done for us. And it's just giving that broader sense of variation from the deeper folds in his face that we're going to get from the ZBrush anyway, so it's going to line up perfectly. And there we go. We are completely done with the epidermal color maps. So I hope you guys can see how we've spent a lot of time layering things that didn't really seem to go anywhere until we get to this stage where we start adding this fine detail. And it just kind of really beautifully comes together if you plan things properly. We're getting some really great tone and some really amazing detail from that skin pore, from the skin scans, right around the eyes, all around the nose here. So if I turn this back off, you can see what a difference it makes. So we're getting some really nice blotchiness in here. We just fold that fine displacement in and takes our textures from interesting to believable in very, very short time. So I want you guys to explore these techniques here in order to kind of polish off your base color maps.